So I'm an unashamed financial economist. My first job was to work at a bank as a financial trader. And when I thought I need to go back to sciences instead of being a banker, I got my PhD in financial economics. And I have a Master of Business Administration degree. So when I hit upon complex subjects, my instinct is to follow the money. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go through the money trail when we look at that. But before I do that, I do want to make the statement that I easily think, well, I think that the presentation that we just heard from Candace is easily the most important presentation of those entire 2 days. Okay, so follow the money. Yes, I agree. So what does it cost to serve a healthy meal to the world's plate? And the cost is more or less the same around the world. It's 3 PPP US dollars, meaning per purchasing power parity adjusted dollars. So you see here from left to right, we have 185 countries. Not all of them are named. We have some very expensive countries. There are statistical outliers, starting off with Japan, and at the other end, we have a couple of statistical outliers where we probably did not got all the numbers right. But for the largest amount of countries in the world, this is the $3 mark here. A healthy meal with all the nutrients that we talked about yesterday costs about $3 PPP dollars. And researchers, and this is brand new research, it came out this year, and 3 billion people, meaning more than a third of the global population, cannot afford that $3 a day per person. So the blue bars here is the cost of an energy sufficient diet. And that is, for the most part, less than $1. So the essence here is we can actually provide enough calories to just about everybody in the world. Now, there's places in the world we cannot do that, but it's not the food system's fault. It's usually war. It's difficult to supply enough calories to people in Yemen and Somalia and in various places in Africa. If they're shut off from a functioning economy by war, then we also cannot feed them. But that's a political issue. It's not an agronomical issue. But under normal circumstances, we have enough calories to give people to survive on calories. But as we heard yesterday, calories is not the full game. But we do not have the means yet to give everybody a sufficiently nutrient-rich food. That's the real challenge that we have. So in the next couple of slides, I will talk a lot about proteins, and I will talk about proteins as a placeholder for nutrient-dense foods. I just need to boil it down to one metric, okay? But this is not to say that protein is everything in the end of all. It's a placeholder for we need nutrient-dense foods. Here. So we looked at what's the PPP dollar price for 10 grams of bioavailable digested protein by food group. That's a very chunky title, right? So how does that work? For cattle meats, for instance, so in high-income countries, this is the blue bar, and cattle meats in high-income countries are about 65 US dollar cents, PPP dollar cents, for a 10-gram equivalent. So Of course, I don't buy protein, I buy a piece of steak, but in that steak, I would find a certain number of bioavailable proteins. So if my unit becomes 10 grams of bioavailable proteins, and I convert all these different foods, so the cattle meats and fish and eggs and milk and pulses and the cereals, into how much protein do they contain? And do that by each of the 6 large income groups, so high income countries, upper middle income countries, lower middle income countries, low income countries, and China and India. So this is done on a data set that the World Bank has put together in terms of what does different consumer items cost in every country in the world. So it's a fantastic, very unique data set that has also only become available to us recently. So a few observations about this thing. So first of all, I do not understand why fish is so expensive in high income countries. I have not received a good answer on that yet. So just an observation, not really very important, but why is fish so expensive in the places where I live? Milk and cheese. We have a great success story of high-income country dairy. It is, that's the blue bar here, right? Look at how, on a bioavailable protein basis, high-income country dairy is the most cost-effective way to deliver a high protein dense food almost anywhere in the world, not just in high income countries, but across the world. High income country dairy is the cheapest, most cost effective way of nutrient dense food. In India, which also depends very much on dairy products, it's almost 3 times. So it's actually on the dairy sector where we have experienced some of the heaviest attacks that we need to reduce this. And we're actually striking at the heart of an industry that is fundamental to providing nutrient-dense food at good prices. Now, this is also interesting, I think. Poultry and eggs are cheaper in terms of delivering proteins than the cereals on which they're feeding. So if I'm somewhere in the world and I have a kilo of wheat or a kilo of maize, I'm actually better off taking that kilo and feeding it to my chicken in order to get chicken meat and chicken eggs, because that gives me a higher quality food than eating that wheat directly. Just imagine what that does to the whole food competition debate. If you look at it not in terms of kilos or calories, but if you look at it in terms of cost per nutrient-dense food. Another one, beef, cattle meat, so this beef and buffalo, is actually quite price competitive with other forms of pig meats and poultry meats, when you consider that you can actually transport beef with much less logistical requirements. Beef stays for a couple of weeks, doesn't spoil, whereas pig meats and poultry meats very quickly need to be put into a cold chain before they spoil. So the costs of logistics is not incorporated here, but beef has that quality of not spoiling that fast. And that's very critical when we look at how we make these foods available onto the table. So especially in the middle and lower income countries, beef is actually a very cost competitive, very price competitive source of meat. Now here we have pulses and nuts, and they seem to be the cheapest sources of protein at first sight. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So that's the picture of what it costs different people around the world to buy protein-rich, nutrient-dense foods. So then the question is, and we touched upon that yesterday, do we have enough of them? Well, apparently we don't, because 3 billion people cannot afford these foods. So where are these gaps? So let's look at the protein supply per country income group. So here again, we have the high income group with the upper middle income, lower middle, low, China, India, and global average today. And here's a little forecast, global average 2050. The same food categories, but now also including fruits and vegetables in this. So high income countries, we have a total supply, and this is important. This is supply. This is not yet consumption. This is what the food system puts on the supermarket shelf or makes available for restaurants to serve. So high-income countries, we have a little bit more than 100 grams per person per day that is being available. The only other big block of countries that achieves that is China, same amount. So, and this is the composition. So in high-income countries, most of this is beef, pork, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy. So about 2/3 is animal source proteins. Then comes a little bit vegetables, pulses, and these are proteins gained from cereals, right? So as we go to the low income strata, the animal source proteins become a tiny amount, and most of the proteins come out of pulses and cereals, as also in India. So this is the picture. Where does the proteins come from in the different places in the world? So is this enough, or is that not enough? Skip over that. So the answer depends on which of these many numbers you want to choose. So you can make some assumptions where you say, well, easy, we have enough protein. We're covered, okay? So this value here, 1.0, means we have all the protein we need. We may have to distribute it a bit more evenly, but in principle, we have enough. But you can also make other assumptions. And then you say, well, we're almost facing a gap of 50%. So we would actually have to double protein supply in order to make sure that everybody has enough. And then if you go into the future to 2050, you may have to look at a factor of 2.5 or even more. So it all depends on assumptions. Now, since I'm not a nutritionist, since I'm an economist, I just do this in form of scenarios. And let me show you what are the assumptions that you can decide to take. So back to this chart. What is enough protein? So yesterday, Nick was telling us it's enough to have 50 grams per person per day. And he's right. You know, this is being sourced from the Institute of Medicine. This is the global recommendation body, and it says there that 50 grams or equivalent of grams per day per kilo, whatever way it works out at about 50 grams per person per day is enough. And if you take that line, you can see that, well, actually, even low-income countries are just about making that hurdle. So if you take that as your benchmark, you're more or less okay. Have to work out a few distribution issues, but we're good. The European Union and USA recommended daily allowances, they go up to 64 grams per person per day. So that already becomes more demanding on the global food system. These poverty researchers that I showed you the charts earlier that say what is an affordable basket meal costs. They think 75 grams per person per day would be good. Seems to me, if I follow epidemiological evidence as endorsed by Bradley and Neil of yesterday, they seem to be suggesting that 100 grams per person per day would be good. But Neil is also saying that there's running experiments up to 200 grams per person per day. So, so pick any one of these numbers, and then you know whether we have enough or not. Now, what's that epidemiological evidence that I personally believe in a lot, which is the PURE study. It has 135,000 members in 667 communities, 18 countries. And it basically says you want to have 17% of your caloric intake, of your energy intake being provided by proteins. And if you do that, you have a hazard ratio of 0.79 versus if you have only 11%. So if I look at these outcomes here, and this is very crude, and I don't want to pretend to be a nutritionist, I'm not, but I'm just following Bradley's recommendations and Neil's recommendations. So if I look at this, this translates into that 100 gram number. So I personally believe in that. So that's, but it's up to you which line you want to take. Now, the other thing is, if we put that bar, wherever we put that bar, if we put it up here or here or here, you can easily come to the point that we need more of these proteins, and then you could say, well, India is eating a lot of pulses, so beans, lentils, peas, and so on. Why can we not repeat that? By the way, these pulses have also very healthy amount of fibers in them, so it's a good food. And so why don't we increase? If India can do that, why do we not have more of these pulses also in high income rich countries? So that could be one of the solutions to increase the amount of proteins on the table. Now, a few caveats though. Since years, India cannot increase its pulses production due to agronomic difficulties. It's just really difficult to grow pulses. So you need fertilizer, you need climatic stability, sometimes it rains too much, sometimes too little, and so on and so forth. So India is renowned, rightly so, for being the largest market for pulses. And because India keeps on growing so fast, it needs more of it, but it cannot even increase its own production because it's hard. It's really economically difficult to do. The other thing is pulses are toxic. They need up to 2 hours, depending on which pulse you take. You need up to 2 hours of cooking time for them to become edible. Now, in our modern kitchen in a rich, expensive country, you just take your steam oven or your steam pot, and then your pack of peas and beans is done in 20 minutes. But if you're sitting in Africa, where your cooking utensils are supplied by local firewood, that is a problem if you have to cook it for 2 hours. And I have the suspicion that those people who say we need to eat more pulses around the world have not really cooked pulses themselves since a while. The other thing about pulses is they tend to be available only during the harvest season. So what do you do for the rest of the year? Well, you can dry them, you can marinate them, you can do all kinds of things, but they have very demanding storage requirements. And storage is a problem in the poor parts of the world. An animal, you can harvest an animal year-round, whenever you need it, but the pulse is only available at the time of harvest, and after that, it spoils easily. Okay, let's eat vegetables. So apparently China is eating an enormous amount of vegetables. And then again, that's not just good because of protein that's in there. It's all sorts of fantastic bionutrients in there, fibers and so on and so forth. Alice was saying yesterday, it would be great if we ate more vegetables. And China would be a great example to do so, right? And if you have ever been to China, this is very much confirmed anecdotally. You just keep on vegetables from morning until night. So let's do that, but a few caveats here too. I mentioned that all of these numbers are just supply. This is what is available. That does not necessarily mean what ends up in the stomach. And so on the way from being available, it rots in the retail store, it rots on the way to the fridge, it rots in the fridge, it's left over on the plate, it's being fed to pets. So there's a lot of stuff that happens to food between what's available and what is actually consumed, intaken. I mean, just stomach, goes into the stomach. And it's a wild guess how much waste we have. I mean, it's just, we're so poorly informed about how waste we have. But recently, an interesting approach became possible. So if we take the food balance sheet from Faustat and say, what is available? And then there's another database also came out this year called the Global Dietary Database that says we measure with statistical methods of what everybody is eating. And so then the difference should be waste. The difference has to be either waste or measurement errors. So for proteins, the wastage rates is 20%. If you compare Faustat data and Global Dietary Database data, it's a difference of 20%. Could be either statistics or could be real waste. Now, wastage rates on overall vegetables is 50%, according to those two databases. And the wastage rates on overall fruits is 70%. So before we go out and say, let's eat more vegetable and fruits, and this way we solve the global nutrient-dense food issues, we should first figure out what's going on here, because otherwise we might be creating just a lot more waste. So these were the assumptions that go into these different scenarios, and pick your assumptions and then you come out. But I think we need to double protein supply today, and we need to triple it until 2050. And for that, whether it's just a doubling or 1.5ing or 1.8ing, who knows? But we need more pulses and vegetables and fruits. Yes, we do. We need more dairy and eggs and fish. We need more meat from cattle, pigs, and poultry. We need to reduce waste. We need to do all of this, regardless of whether the challenge is a doubling or 1.5ing. But the one thing we do not need more, okay? We do not need more staples. We have enough cereals. All of this, everybody in the world is supplied with enough staples, okay? We have enough corn, we have enough wheat, we have enough barley, we have enough of that. What we need is nutrient-dense foods. That's where we're short. And the question is, do we have scope in our food system, our production system? Now, we have this fairy tale of feed-food competition, and I don't really think that exists. And part of the reason is this, because we can feed enough energy-dense food to our people in the world. And that's the same food that our animals eat, and we have enough of that. You can also look at it from a land utilization point of view. So around the world, we have 5 billion hectares. 4 billion of that is grassland. 1 billion is cropland. And if we look at that 1 billion cropland, 70% of the cropland is cereals. 5% is, for instance, vegetables. So that works out to 1% of the global acreage is vegetables. Now, if we want to grow more vegetables, if we want to double vegetables, take that and measure 1%. Yeah, take it from 1 to 2%. That's okay. We have enough land. So no cow, no animal is taking land away from anybody intentioning to make more vegetables. So there is no such thing as we have not enough space to grow vegetables. We have enough space. Animals are not taking away space from animals, from vegetables. And you don't have to know a PhD to know this, okay? This is, you go on Faustat under data and land use, here, one click, and then you click on world and land utilization 2019, second click, here's your numbers. It's easily accessible information. Coming to my end here, just want to highlight one issue. I do not think we have a food feed competition, but we have an animal feed fuel competition. We're taking away much too much biomass in the world, and we're feeding our cars and our fires with it rather than animals. And because we're feeding our cars instead of animals, that creates the shortage of nutrient-dense food. Now notice here, so this is a flow system, material flow system around the world. It starts here on the production. This is the tonnage that we're producing in various places, and this is all proportional to each other. So this is the food that comes out at the end, raw food and processed food. This is the amount of fuels that come out of this agricultural system. Look at the tiny amount of oil meals that everybody seems to be so concerned about in terms of kilos. This is the amount of feed. And I want to highlight 3 examples very quickly where this is particularly egregious. Maize in the USA, okay? This is the tiny amount of food that we get out of maize in the United States, and most of that is the high glucose, fructose syrup, which should not be called food, it should be called poison, but we grow maize in the United States for growing feed for animals. Yes, we do. And we also grow feed for producing ethanol. And then we have the guts to even call it bioethanol. This is biomass that we're taking away from the ability to create feed for animals that we would need to give nutrient-dense foods to our global population. Second example is sugarcane in Brazil. These are the tiny amounts of foods that we're producing here. And this is the huge amount of sugarcane that goes into making bioethanol in Brazil for driving around. And third example is palm in Southeast Asia. Again, tiny amounts of foods that come out of there, huge amounts of biomass that we're not using for anything at all. All the palm leaves, all the trunks, they're basically just being burned up and polluting the skies. And we could be taking all this biomass here and feeding it to animals if only we were willing to do that. So the real issue in the world that prevents us from having more animals within the given resources is a feed fuel competition, but not a feed food competition. Now, if you want to know more about this, I encourage you to look at our website, goldsciences.org. This is a tool, you don't have to register, it's openly, freely available anywhere. You can play around with different scenarios of how the mass flow balances in our global food system operate. Thank you very much.